Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today I want to ask the question, how good is Goodreads? And when I say good, I don't mean good compared to other similar services like Storygraph. I mean good in a more general sense. So is Goodreads good for us as readers? And I'm increasingly coming round to the idea that it probably isn't that great for me as a reader, or at least that there are significant trade-offs in my usage of it, which I need to be aware of. So I'm going to talk a bit about those in this video. I would start by saying though, this video was partly inspired by a video by Greg from the channel Another Bibliophile Read. So Greg put up a video in the last week or so talking about why he doesn't use Goodreads anymore. Now he has quite specific reasons for not using it. And the main one was really around the fact that in the past, things that he has read and logged on Goodreads have disappeared from the Goodreads database. So the Goodreads librarians who kind of run Goodreads in the background had made some poor decisions about what should and shouldn't be on Goodreads and had removed some things that Greg had read. And his concern is probably quite rightly that things like that could happen in the future. And it's worth just reflecting on that quickly before I get into the main part of the video. So Goodreads is effectively run by volunteers. So whilst it's owned by Amazon and is part of a huge multinational billion-dollar corporation, multi-billion-dollar corporation, the people who actually do a lot of the day-to-day running of Goodreads and the maintenance of the Goodreads database and Goodreads library effectively are volunteers. So anyone can sign up to be a Goodreads librarian. I myself actually am registered as a Goodreads librarian, which means that I can add books and remove books and edit books on the database. And I'm fallible, certainly. I'm sure other Goodreads librarians are fallible as well. So that can lead to bad decisions being made about the books that are, or the content that's in that database. And this is something that seems to me very much the way a lot of the supposedly free services that we use online are managed nowadays, is that they do rely on, whilst they're owned by huge corporations, they do rely on people doing that for free, doing the kind of some of the maintenance activity for free because they enjoy it. And an equivalent would be people who run subreddits on Reddit. So there's a lot of that about nowadays, and clearly a lot of the majority of the content on sites like Goodreads and on social media sites generally is generated by the users, by the individuals, rather than by anybody else. So it's a very different way of of running a business than we're used to from the past. And I think that's something we all need to consider when we're using services like that, is who's actually doing the running of them in the background, and do we trust those people to do a good job? What rules are they following? And that was kind of the thrust to an extent of Greg's video. So let me talk about my own feelings about Goodreads. So I've used Goodreads for a long time, I think probably 10 years plus. And I have over that time found it a very useful, a very useful service. And what I use it for primarily, and have since the beginning, is tracking what I'm reading. So I've never particularly dived into like the forums and things like that on Goodreads. For me, I think there's, for a lot of people, there will be value in those as interesting places to discuss books and learn about new books and things like that, and just chat with people with similar tastes. But for me, I find the kind of structure of forums to feel quite dated. So I used to be into like video game forums and things like that kind of 15-20 years ago. I don't enjoy that kind of very structured way of discussing things so much anymore. I much prefer the more fluid way of discussion that happens on social media, through the comments on my videos, and through things like Discord servers, where there's more fluidity to the way things can be discussed, and you haven't got such a rigidity to the structure. So that's one of the reasons why I've never really, used the forums on Goodreads. But as I say, they are there, and I'm sure a lot of people do enjoy them. The other thing that it's useful for is, you know, seeing what people you're connected to are reading. Now, I don't necessarily do that much. I'm not someone who signs into Goodreads and scrolls through my feed to see what other people are reading. But clearly, I am exposed to that homepage, that Goodreads homepage every so often, so I do see what other people are reading, and that can be interesting. And I think increasingly as the channel has grown, it has become something that's quite useful for me as a way to share what I'm reading with my audience. So obviously I talk about those things in videos, but also, you know, my Goodreads account details are, or, you know, my Goodreads profile is linked in the about section for the channel, so anyone can, you know, friend me or follow my reviews on Goodreads and see what I'm reading. So that for me is as an additional, you know, an additional thing for the channel, if you like, is quite useful. What I've stopped doing on Goodreads, and I gave this up I think a couple of years ago, is having an annual goal, and I'll come on to, you know, to talk a bit more about that as I talk through, you know, the things I think are less positive about Goodreads. But for me, that has definitely felt like the right decision. So, you know, to put it plainly, and to start to get into that discussion, I found that having an annual goal was shaping my reading in ways that wasn't good for me. It was encouraging me to read certain types of books to hit a goal, rather than reading books purely for pleasure. So that for me was definitely a negative. And I think, you know, overall, that's the thing that I have some problems with Goodreads and similar services, and that I'm increasingly thinking about personally as a trade-off for using those services, is the fact that there is a kind of gamification of reading. And when I was thinking about this video, when I was preparing for this video, it occurred to me that my ritual for reading a book now, very much without me even thinking about it, includes Goodreads. So when I start reading a book, I will log it on Goodreads, and, you know, Amazon have made it very easy for you to do that if you're a Kindle user. You can pretty much do it automatically when you start reading a book on your Kindle, and similarly when you finish reading a book on Kindle, you know, you can rate it you know, within the Kindle, and it will send that rating to Goodreads and mark that book as read. But if I'm reading a physical book, you know, pretty much the first thing I do when I finish reading that book is go to Goodreads and mark it as finished. So my ritual of reading a book now has Goodreads completely baked into it. And I'm not sure that's a good thing. I'm not sure that logging that I've read the book on Goodreads does anything for me at all in terms of my, you know, my pleasure in having enjoyed, you know, in having read the book, you know, the enjoyment I've got out of the book, the meaning I've got out of the book. None of those things are enhanced at all by the fact that I've logged it. So why do I feel that I have to log it? And I think it's, you know, partly it's a like a behavioural thing, isn't it? I've got used to doing that. It's become something ingrained in my reading habits. But what does it serve? Does it serve me? Do I get anything out of that? So I get a record of all the books I've read, but how often do I actually go back and look at that record? I don't think I do. I might do very occasionally if I see a book in a bookshop or something like that, and I can't remember if I've read it or not, which, to be honest, happens more than it probably should do as I'm getting older. But it doesn't really give me anything other than that, apart from the fact that, you know, people who watch my videos can go and look at my Goodreads profile and see, you know, pretty much everything I've ever read, which they may find interesting. But yeah, there's a trade-off there, isn't there? So there's a trade-off in terms of my time, because it takes time to do that. There's also a trade-off in terms of it means that I'm sharing more data with Amazon, and I don't know how much data I want to share with Amazon. You know, I use a lot of Amazon services. I buy a lot of stuff from Amazon. You know, I'm a Prime subscriber. But do I want them to know, you know, the paperbacks that I'm reading? Does it matter that they know that? I'm not sure. But it is definitely a consideration. And I think sometimes people we can get too worried about the amount of information that big companies hold about us. It's, you know, it's something that I go back and forth on a bit, I guess, but it's definitely a consideration. Does a multi-billion-dollar company need to know that I just read The Bog by Michael Talbot and I gave it 4 stars and I quite enjoyed it? Do they need to know that? Probably not. Do I gain anything by them knowing that? I don't feel like I do. Do they gain something from that? Well, they clearly feel like they do. So, Amazon don't run Goodreads out the goodness of their hearts. They run it to gather information about consumers so they can, sell more stuff to those consumers. So I get recommendations and things like that on my Kindle home screen all the time based on books I've read, that weren't Kindle books. So Amazon are clearly using my data to try and, sell more stuff to me. And do I need to buy more stuff? Not really. I've kind of got enough stuff. So that's definitely a consideration. And the other thing about Goodreads is it very much encourages you to think about books, the quality of books, in terms of a 5-point metric, doesn't it? So as I said, as soon as you finish reading a book on Kindle, if you've linked your Goodreads account, it will prompt you to give it a rating out of 5 stars. Which is, it can be a useful shorthand, can't it? Giving a star rating to a book or a movie or whatever. But it can never capture the full meaning and quality of a book. I've given books 5 stars which are, objectively not great books, but which I really, really enjoyed. So how useful is that 5-star rating to someone looking at all of my Goodreads books? I'm not sure how useful it is. What they really want to know is my thoughts on the book, and those can never be, properly encapsulated in a rating of 1 to 5. So all of that leaves me wondering whether the trade-offs for me personally involved in using Goodreads are worth it. So, do I want Amazon to have even more information about me? Do I want to give up more of my time logging books that I've read? And part of the problem with giving something like that up is, I've spent so much time logging all the stuff I've read on Goodreads and leaving little reviews and things like that. It feels like a real wrench to move away from it. But I'm genuinely wondering now to myself whether or not I'm actually getting the value out of Goodreads that I thought I was. And I think a lot of the appeal of it as a site to me initially, or as a service, was that it was so easy to log what you've read. But now I'm seriously questioning what the value in logging what you've read actually is. Beyond, having that record that you can refer back to. But, how often do I do that? It's a genuine question that I'm asking myself now, whether I should just, bin my Goodreads account completely. So do let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this are. Let me know if if you're a passionate Goodreads user and you find it really useful and what you find useful about it. Or are you someone who used to use it and has moved away from it? Increasingly, I'm feeling like, as with many things in the kind of modern digital age, it's something that feels useful, that we convince ourselves is useful, but which actually isn't that useful, and where there are significant trade-offs that we don't even consider. Anyway, as always, hope you found that interesting. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.